Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Allison Luce, an artist that I met recently at a very interesting conference where we were looking at the artwork of a particular artist through the lens of theology. It was a great experience. So, welcome, Allison. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about this conference too, because I think that was really fantastic.
Sure, that would be great. My name is Allison Luce, and I currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina, specifically in Mooresville in the Lake Norman area, where I am a studio artist. And I also split my time between Hilton Head Island, where I have a completely disparate job as a real estate agent there. And I work for eXp Realty, and I'm on a large team in South Carolina called Coast. And I'm an individual agent in North Carolina as well. And so I navigate in two different worlds and two different spheres, and I love both of them. And I'm excited to share with you about my artwork tonight and to talk a little bit about the conference we went to, and also to discuss some of Ed's blog posts because I feel like there are threads that run through his writing that I've been exploring for years in my artwork. And so I'd love to be able to discuss some of these topics with him.
I welcome that. I look forward to that. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. First,
Sure.
what was the instigating incident that led you to be an artist? I mean, all of us grow up as kids and we're doodling and stuff like that. But what was it that convinced you or said something inside of you that says, I'm going to be an artist?
Well, when I was in high school and growing up, I always loved art. I was very involved in arts in the high school. And then I decided when I went to college that I was going to be practical. And so I went in as a biology major. And then my first semester, I was sitting there studying with a bunch of students, and I looked around and they were all had their nose in their biology book. And I wish I was in the art building. And I looked at the girl next to me. I said, "Do you like what we're studying?" And she looked at me and she said, "I love biology." And then it was at that moment I knew I wasn't going to be able to continue on. And then I just went and I switched my major to fine arts. And then I now have three art degrees.
Oh, is that right? Wow, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. And what is it that your art consists of? I mean, I'm asking kind of what form does it take? Is it is so? Are you a painter? Are you a sculptor? Are you a, a visual artist? A placement of creating rooms or what? Tell me about what it is how your art is expressed through your creativity.
Well, I work in ceramic sculpture and I have two bodies of work. One is a large scale installation that's comprised of about usually like around 600 to 1,000 individual ceramic objects that are small. And I'll show you one because I'm out in my art studio. I'll just grab a couple right here.
Okay.
So these are the components of an example. This is one of my ancient expanse pieces,
Yeah.
and it is handmade clay that is been fired. And I start with just a lump of clay, then I make them into kind of like little pinch pot forms, and then they're created to look like objects from the ocean. And then I install them, these individual components, into large scale installations in the gallery that can be usually like they're about maybe 8 to 10 feet high and 6 to 20 feet long. And so it's a large scale drawing with all of these ceramic pieces that creates abstract shapes. And the body of the work, Ancient Expanse, comes from my longing, since the work is inspired by the ocean, and to connect kind of the never-ending cycle of the tide. And since we live by the beach in South Carolina, you go to the beach and every day you see the cycling of the ocean. And so it was this longing to reference the connectivity that we all have to kind of this larger life cycle that connects us all.
Do these installations, I mean, do you move them from place to place to different places? That's one question.
That's a great question. So I install them in galleries and then in different places. And usually I'll put one up and then have it up for a month or two, depending on the duration. And then so every time I install one, it's different, because then no two installations are exactly alike, because the pieces and the way, the size, the shapes will all be different. And then I do have what I laughingly refer to as my commercial line. And so then I have these on the ceramic pieces on panels. And so then it's really easy to install. And I've sold numerous, probably like 3 by 4 foot panels that people have in their houses.
So I guess we could say that these installations are really living art because they're living in different places and they're taking a different form every time you create them.
Mhm. Right.
I like that. I like that a lot. And do you have people that um, follow you and want to see how you have created the next installation? You know, oh, I was like this. I want to see what you do the next time. And do you have that? Do you have that kind of a fan base that follows you like that?
I wish. I don't know.
They're not
Sometimes
telling you. No, yeah.
sometimes I meet people and they said, "Oh, I've seen your artwork here. It's nice to get to meet you in person." And so I have had people that have who know my artwork, and then I get to meet them. So it's always nice when there's a connection that they've seen my work out and about in shows before.
You know, when I published my first book back in 2018 called Circle of Impact, um, I spent the next 10 months traveling, almost a year, traveling around the country doing book events. And I think I did 40 of these over the course of a year. And people would come up to me, and I'm asking sort of if they do the same. They come up to me and they say, "Oh, I'd love to write a book. Oh, and I have a book I want to write." And you know, and what they're saying is they identify with you. Um, in this case, they would say, "I would really love to be able to do the art that you do because I really, you know, I find it beautiful and I find it creative, and it is expressing something that I feel I identify with it." Do you have people that kind of talk to you in that way?
Well, something I find to be unique to the arts is that I find that there are a lot of people who might have taken up art as a hobby.
Hmm.
And so then you get kind of like these comparisons with, okay, so then if maybe you've taken one art class, does it make you an artist? And then kind of that scenario. And so then it is an interesting concept, because I think it happens, and it could be the same parallels in writing as well, where people might self-publish or things like that. So a broad spectrum in the arts. And I think I try to always look up to the artists I know that are doing the best work and use them as my litmus for how's my work holding up.
Yeah, it's interesting how people move through these stages of their life where they discover that they have a real talent for something that
Hmm.
no one else has seen, but they discover it in, you know. So when people would come up to me and they say, "Oh, I'd love to write a book," I said, don't write a book. Just write. Get your little notebook, you know, get your little notebook, you know,
Right.
and carry it around with you and just write down words and phrases and maybe even a sentence or two every day. Just write something down every day. And if you have a book in you, it will show itself. It will emerge and you will write your book. But don't feel
That's
like you have to go write the book. That's a whole different sort of thing.
that's very true. And
And so,
I always wonder that about that. And I always wonder about the different facets of the arts. For
mhm.
instance, I think like, why can't I use words creatively? And so, because I feel like I can do a competent job, I can write my artist statement and things like that, but I've never been able to weave words together in a tapestry the way like Flannery O'Connor does, or just different authors and different poets. And so I always think it's interesting how different artists are gifted with different gifts. And then that's what makes everything unique.
On my one of my guests that I had on a few weeks ago, Sarah Kernion, um, has two nonverbal autistic children, and part of our conversation was about communication, and those two children communicate differently because they're nonverbal. They don't speak, and I think that sort of situation for communication is very similar for that being a way of people to express their artistic or their creativity.
Mhm.
Something in them which they can do to create, to express their creativity, to express some kind of artistic desire within them. And it doesn't have to be writing, it doesn't have to be ceramics, it could be painting, it could be drawing. Um, at the conference, there was and I don't remember his name, but there was the fellow from William and Mary, who,
Steve Prince.
yes,
Mhm.
and he sat next to me, and I was fascinated by him because he had a notebook open, and he had a pen, and he was drawing the speaker, and he created this beautiful portrait just in 10 minutes, 15 minutes watching the speaker. And I'm thinking, how in the world can you do that? I mean, it's the same sort of question that you had about writing. I said I could never do that. And he just had this knack, this talent for creating the image, and it was really a very clear. It was clearly this person. It was really really cool.
Yeah, I've sat by Steve at conferences before and I've seen his work. And so he's such a talented artist. Definitely a gifted figure artist, and he can just, it's beautiful the way he captures people.
So the conference we were at was talking about embodied faith, as expressed in the paintings of uh, Edward. Um,
Nippers?
yes, Nippers. And what did you take away from that conference? What was it that was meaningful to you about it?
I think what resonated with me was that there is still a need in this digital age for visceral connections,
Wow.
be it with artwork
Mhm.
or with other people, that no matter how digital the world becomes, this connection is in perpetuity and will continue. And that I think it's up to the artists and the writers and the musicians who are the storytellers to keep up their work, because people are still longing for this no matter how much screen time they have a day.
I think that's exactly right. And I took away the same sort of thing, that how important it is to to recognize that the experiences we have of, say, looking at a work of art, um, is it's not just a mental thing. And even if it's on the screen, like this, it's not just mental and it's not just visual. It's something that's much more embodied. it touches more aspects of us than simply something that's a recognition, of mental recognition of, oh, that's a good piece of work or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I thought it was a great conference. And for me, it was exciting because I got to see friends of mine that I've known for 10, 15 years, 20 years, a long time. And so it was great to be able to connect with other artists and get to meet new people and then just see. I enjoyed the drum circle that they had. And I'm excited that that this kind of dialogue was going on in Charlotte at Gordon Conwell. So.
Oh, yeah, I enjoyed it too. And what really captivated me was, I'm a Presbyterian minister, and so the theology, I'm a graduate of the seminary. That theology was very familiar to me. The theology of the incarnation, of the embodiment of God into a physical person, Jesus, and that there is a there is something that we can take for our own lives from understanding that story. And but if you go over into the secular world, they have a similar story going on about embodiment, and and it comes out of the world of phenomenology, but where that says who we are as embodied persons is we learn things and we know things not just in our minds but in our bodies, and our bodies are telling us something. And and I'm we could go into the philosophy of all that, but what I saw was that there are these two different worlds that really don't communicate very much, but they have very similar understandings of the nature of who we are as human beings, as embodied persons, where knowledge and creativity and awareness and consciousness and all those sort of things, both in those both worlds come together in as a way of describing what human experience is like.
Yeah.
And artists are ones that are helping us to see that. I mean, I think it was one of the points of the conference was that art uh, takes us into a place where it's not just a mental thing, but it's actually something that we feel as some kind of totality of our lives.
Right. Absolutely.
So do you have? I mean, you're creating art that has a connection to the ocean, to the beach.
Mhm.
Um, is there um, is there a spiritual aspect of that you connect with that kind of continues to direct you as a way of saying this is something meaningful for me?
Definitely. And then I have two more bodies of work. And so I have another body of work that's called the Serpent Tree. And then I have another body of work that's called Liminal Spaces. And the Serpent Tree is made of ceramics. And then the Liminal Spaces series is are all drawings. And so then they're similar in concept. And then I was reading through I was reading through your spectacle of the real.
Yeah,
And so then I was drawn to, let's see, the living in a world of impermanence. And so I wanted to see if we could talk about that
yeah,
because it
certainly.
reminds me of my liminal spaces drawing series that I've been working on. So
So what did you derive from what I was saying there? What did you think of what what was the
I
connection for you?
really liked that the essay that you wrote and just thinking about that and also how it starts off as the spectacle of the real. And I feel that in this, I guess it's been going on for like a long for especially the last 10 years with the discrepancy between the digital and the tactile of fine art. I'm in what I mean, can this be called like an outdated material, like that there's this focus on material that is largely irrelevant if you're looking in a digital world, which is where so many things are headed now. And so I was fascinated by kind of this conversation about what we deem to be real with what we see online and what we allow to like filter into our lives versus what is actually like this in terms of like impermanent, what is real, what's not, what's lasting, what's not. I have a body of work called The Serpent Tree that I've been working on for a long time. And so it is loosely based on the Garden of Eden, and it is created from clay. And so it's my first reference point to even starting the body of work was from dust we became, and from dust we return. So the ceramics and seeing clay as a metaphor for the body.
Yeah.
And the forms are, they reference, they're floral, and they reference nature, they reference the body, their torso size, and they're beautiful. And in many respects, they're almost cloyingly sweet. And so they have aspects of them that are overtly beautiful, and then aspects of them that are slightly repulsive or slightly suggestive or uncomfortable. And so there's a dichotomy between innocence and experience in the work because it's based on the whole Garden of Eden and like the desire that led to destruction.
Fascinating. And
So that's what I like to work on.
and um do people who buy the works from this series, do they identify with what you're trying to convey? Do they understand what you're trying to convey in the work of art?
Usually. Yeah, and they understand kind of like just like the beauty of the work, and also it's very fragile, and so they see the parallels between the beauty of the work, and they see the parallel between the fragility of our lives and the brevity of existence.
So this notion of impermanence that I wrote about in that essay, do you what how do I ask this question? Do you see that there is um, a very real sense of impermanence in our world?
Absolutely.
And what does that look like to you? How do we experience that?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of like your this circle of impact and talking about that we're constantly in transition. And so if you think that the only thing that's certain is death and taxes, and so that we know that every day is a gift and that we all have a finite time. And so I think about that as impermanent in one respect, and then the other respect, it just being kind of like the constantly evolving landscape that we inhabit from day to day. You don't know what the new norm is anymore. It's constantly changing. And so I feel that we live in an impermanent world.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, that's exactly the way we live. But I think it's also true that there's a a permanence to our lives, meaning, and I think this is a spiritual biblical point of view that you know we're not born simply to die and then disappear. We are born and we live in this realm for the course of our lives, and then we die. We go into another realm, and
Right.
call that heaven or whatever you want to call it. But that I see that there is permanence, and that. But in this realm, the impermanence can be reversed, shall we say, through the impact that we have on people. The legacy that we leave when we pass away is the legacy of our impact upon the people who have been touched by us. It may be our children, our spouse, or it may be our neighbors, or it may be the people that buy your art. They're touched by it, and they're changed by it, they're transformed by it, and it remains something that maybe they pass on to someone else so that there's this long connection, relational connection that I think is the replacement of the notion that we're all kind of individual, atomistic individuals that only have this life and that once it's over, it's over.
Right. And I think that that concept of the eternal really manifested itself with the disaster in North Carolina. And because I know that you have a connection to the mountains, here in Charlotte, we're 2 hours away, and just the outpouring of love I've seen from everywhere that's going to these people that have experienced this tragedy has just spoken to me about the connectivity that we all experience, and that of just kind of like wanting to alleviate the suffering of others. And so as horrible as the tragedy was, it's been amazing to me to see the outpouring of support and compassion and wanting to rebuild and help people has been really edifying to me to see.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. It's amazing. Um, I've been up there a couple of times and up to Asheville and Black Mountain, and you know, I maybe this is a way to describe it. That the things that are impermanent are things like things are made of metal, wood,
Right. Hmm.
concrete, steel. That they can be wiped out in a storm. I mean, I I went to the West Campus of the Black Mountain Home for Children, and I had been up there in August, September. I think it was in August for a donor event, and the area that the landslide had come down and taken away. I'd been walking that area, that the woods of that area, just within a month before that, and to see how that the world, the physical world, has a level of impermanence, but the love of those places, the love of those people, the contribution of those people, that has a more of a permanence that um, will be remembered. I mean, that's a form of that permanence that I think is I think it's kind of baked into who we are as human beings.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting just to think of the job of artists in general as storytellers, and then in thinking about kind of like the traditions in the North Carolina area, especially up in the mountains, the preponderance of artists in the Asheville area, and the just kind of the and I think it's interesting because I think in this time, as things do continue to be destabilized around the world, that people are looking for those who are telling the truth. And I think that many artists tell the truth about life and its many facets of reality, and that there's a need now more than ever for them to continue telling their stories. So,
Well, I would say, and I obviously agree with you, but I think when we talk about truth, what we are talking about something that's real, and this notion of the spectacle of the real.
there it is, the manuscript.
This is the
Right. Mhm.
series. Um, the notion of the spectacle of the real was that there's this simulated world that is presented to us, and is presented to us on the screen. Social media is a simulated world. The news media is a simulated world. Sports and you know pornography and all these different things, and even in many cases, the church is a simulated world that is unreal. And the question is, how do I know what is real? And
Right.
I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, except I think we know it in our bones. This is why
Yeah.
this embodied faith, or the embodiment of knowledge, is so important because I feel something. Well, the way I've come to describe it is that um, what I have had in my conversations with people about reality, well, people want to say, well, reality is only what you perceive it to be. So we really don't know what reality is. And I said, well, that's only if you see yourself as the center of the universe, that you get to define what reality is. And I don't think anyone is the center of the universe. I think we're all parts of the universe, and that reality is what exists. And that, and it's interesting because this is an ongoing subject with my guest on the podcast, and we talk about consciousness and awareness and how we live our lives and and what I've come to see is that consciousness is a nonverbal language, is the nonverbal language of reality. So I look at of one of your works of art, and I looked at some of those pictures that you showed me when we were together in Charlotte. And I look at that and I'm moved by that. I'm looking at not just your creativity, but the thing that you're trying to convey as something really rich and important. And I'm not just feeling that on some emotional level, and I'm not just thinking it on some kind of analytical level. It's something that fills my entire body with a sense of knowledge and a sense of truth and a sense of something that's um, worth acknowledging or being aware of. And I think that's one of the reasons why art is so important is that it connects us. It's one of those things that connects us in all those different places where all these different senses come together to connect us to what is real, and
Yeah.
therefore have a chance to come to know who we are.
Right. So let me ask you this because I've been interested in this. I've just been thinking about this a lot recently. When we were in Paris this fall, I went into the Shakespeare bookstore. It's the right over in the Latin Quarter. And when I walked into the bookstore, I saw the classic literature section, and I looked through the titles, and I said, "Oh," and I remember when I read all of them. And then I find myself sometimes like when something will happen, like if there's a life event or this in the news or something happens, I'll remember a story from some of these great classics of literatures where the characters become real characters in my world. And so you have these characters who are fictional. They become an important part of your life because they've told some moral story that you have equated into your norm. And does that happen to you?
Oh yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Um, I'm thinking right now of Les Miserables,
Hmm.
Jean Valjean. And I'm a very visual person, so it's not so much the text of the story; it's the way visual artists have told the story, and the film, the musical that came out 10 years ago or something. I I really love that. And when I need to kind of get my head together, I watch that again, and particularly the scene where Jean Valjean has become this successful businessman, and he finds out that someone has been arrested, thinking that it was him, and that this man is going to go to jail, and Jean Valjean has to decide, who am I? Am I this businessman that has all these people that he is responsible for because he's hired them, or am I this man who has been running from the gendarmes for all his life, and he has to decide, who am I? And he decides that he goes to the court, and he gives the serial number of his prison prison file, I guess is the way to see iron, whatever that number is. I think it's a very moving moment because we all have that moment of recognition of, well, who am I? Do I want to be this person? Do I want to be that person? And so, yes, I definitely do that. You know, and it's have that sense of recognition through other people's stories. So,
Very.
do you
Mhm.
who do you identify with? You have one that really speaks to you. Um,
There's so many, I wouldn't even know where to start. And I just feel kind of like I have a character from literature for every scenario, and probably a painting as well, or some kind of sculpture. And it's just we were lucky. We were in Europe for 6 weeks this fall, and we got to see some great icons of art. And so it was a fantastic trip. And then here's another, speaking of spectacle, the spectacle of seeing the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. And that is really interesting because that I always wonder about what draws people to visual art or to see art in particular, a particular work of art that might not normally be interested in art at all. And so I think that that becomes kind of the spectacle of art seeing when it is something that almost becomes comical, like when you're in there and it's so crazy with the crowds.
was that your first time seeing it in person?
I've seen it twice now.
And what was your reaction to that? Is it what you thought it would be?
It was, I was prepared. I knew that it's a small painting. And so I knew that. And I'd had warm up, I've been to the Sistine Chapel in Rome probably 3 or 4 times. And so I'm used to kind of like throngs of tourists being shuffled
Oh,
through.
mhm.
And then I've had art experiences where I've been alone in chapels with, you know, some of the most profound sculptures I think on earth, and when there's no one there. And so I think there's a dichotomy between maybe the marketing things receive, or I know the Mona Lisa is famous because it was stolen multiple times, and so then that attributed to its fame. But I do think it's interesting what the draw is, and I think it's fascinating.
Um, I think Van Gogh is one of those uh, other stories for me, and um,
Yes.
you know, the fact that he went through his whole life with only one sale of a painting, and um, and this is where this line between the virtual and the real becomes really thin, and the two work with each other. So there's an episode in Doctor Who where they 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 meet Vincent and they take him through the TARDIS to contemporary Paris into the Louvre to see the exhibit of his paintings. And there's it's a fantastic scene. And there's a professor there, and he's talking to some students, and Doctor Who kind of ushers Vincent over close to him, and Doctor Who asks, "So what do you think about Van Gogh?" He says, "I think he's the greatest painter ever, because here's a man who had all this pain who was able to create this beauty." And Vincent is hearing this, and he's never heard anything like this before. This affirmation of his genius. And he turns to him and he comes over and he hugs him and gives him a kiss on the cheek and says, "Thank you." And this guy doesn't know who he is, this professor. And then he begins to wonder, is that Vincent? You know, resurrected into the current, time traveled into this current time. It to me it is that sort of thing I wish for every artist is to have someone to recognize their genius.
Right.
And
Right.
because the work that you do is so personal and in many cases done in such isolation from other people
Mm-hmm.
that that to receive appreciation at some level is really I think is really important.
Right. Yes. Speaking of, look here. Oops. Let me see if I can get that. Here it is, Masterpieces in the Van Gogh Museum.
Oh, oh,
So we got to go there. And I will say, as a visual artist, this part, I already knew the story, and but going through the whole museum, it made me feel uncomfortable because it just was so heartbreaking for me to see someone who suffered so much in his lifetime, and then to see thousands of people a day coming to see his work, and just the discrepancy between the actuality of his existence and now what happened really makes me depressed as an artist, because I
well,
think, you know,
but that's a very human response, which is that we recognize the suffering that people go through. I mean, this is what's going on in Western North Carolina, but there are people who want to come and gawk and see it, as if it's a kind of theme park. Oh,
right,
I want to go see the destruction, and it's totally disconnected from the pain and the suffering and the loss that people are experiencing. And I think that's true. And I think in many respects, while it's museums are for viewing great works of art, in another sense, they're totally it's a totally artificial environment because you don't really see the work of art as in the environment of where the painter or the artist had created it. And that's really not for us to have. I mean, we don't really have that privilege of watching Van Gogh or Michelangelo or Edward Hopper or Allison Luce do do their work, do their genius, express their genius in their work because it's such a kind of a personal and private exercise.
right, yeah.
So, anything else in what I was writing that caught your interest?
Actually, yes, I have one last topic to bring up, which is the journey of longing from December 2021. So I read through this and then I found parallels in a series of drawings I was working on. So I thought maybe we could finish up on that.
Sure. Um, Longing. I think longing is the recognition that we have an incomplete understanding of who we are.
Hmm.
And the longing is for self-awareness. And and it's also a longing for other people to be aware of us, to 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 have that a relationship where there's kind of mutual appreciation, mutual admiration. And I think all of those are very difficult in the modern world because the simulation is really designed for the individual to experience something totally out of reality as a way of exploring some facet of their life that may not ever lead anywhere. Let's say, for example. So, and I think the best art really is comes out of longing, the longing to express something, to discover something. And
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's so. Do you see that? I mean, I would I can see how the things that you have created, the ceramics you've created, there's that aspect of longing present there, the longing to attempt to express something about something beautiful or something um, tragic or whatever it may be that you're seeking, you're longing to find expression through your art. Is that right?
Yes. And I've recently been working, well, recently being the last couple of years, on a series of drawings called Liminal Spaces, and they're studies from nature. And so they're objects that I find in my yard. They're like a bit of sponge from the beach, a seed pod, bud and bloom, just different objects of nature. And then I draw them, and through the process, they sometimes become slightly abstracted, but the premise behind the work is trying to capture an object in that moment in time. And since many of them are all natural objects, then they'll start to change or morph immediately. And so I've always been fascinated with trying to capture this brevity of what we are trying to hold on to and just those beautiful moments of life. But I think when I was reading through this article, that there's more to it than that. And so, like you said, is it coming from incompleteness? And is it that desire to be mutually known on different levels, and just, and also the beauty of the natural world and how we connect to it or disconnected. And I think that I've been interested recently just in observing the sky as it transitions into twilight. And then there's just kind of this majesty and how it goes, how that change happens, and just this kind of like drifting into silence and seeing that change. And it perpetuates this cycle that references eternity. Because then, as the days go on, we know there are things that are permanent, like maternity. And so it gives me hope in thinking of that.
Well, this background for me is captures that for me, that sense of and this is a picture that I took last fall. I was living in Cody, Wyoming for a couple of months,
Ooh,
and
that's
um, I had left early in the morning, and I was going up to Yellowstone, and and I don't know if you've ever been to Cody, but west of the town is this large lake. It's a reservoir, and had gone through this tunnel and I was on the by the lake, and this beautiful sky just opened up, and I pulled off and I just started taking pictures with my phone, and and it just set the day for the rest of the day to be filled with similar moments of beauty.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, and so I'm looking forward to going to London later this week, and I'm gonna try to take where I've typically taken pictures of natural things. I love mountains and you know animals, things like that. But I'm going to intentionally look for the human-made world that exists in the city of London, the buildings and the lights and the streets and the automobiles and the all of that. I'm just going to take as many pictures as I can as a way of capturing something that I won't know what I've captured until I return home and I look at that in a more kind of reflective way.
It's true. And I think that that's what's interesting is just kind of like when you are abroad and you get to feel cobble beneath your feet. That doesn't happen a lot here. And it just this sense of place. And so seeing things like Westminster Abbey and just the cathedrals and being able to see just kind of spaces that have been passed down through the generations. And I think that that always gives me a sense of connectivity to eternity in a way that sometimes I have a harder time obtaining here, at least in physical spaces.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, Allison, it's been wonderful to have you here. And I'm wondering how people can find your work, not just to see it, but maybe even to purchase some from you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been great. I've really enjoyed reading your work and we'll be following along on your blogs, that's for sure. So
Well, thank you. How can people find you if they want to interact with you or even find your art and maybe buy some, which would be a lovely thing.
that would be great. My website is AllisonLuce.com. It's ALLISONLUCE.com. And you can look me up there. And then you can reach me by phone or email. And I'd love to talk. And so please look at my artwork. I'd love to get your feedback and let me know your thoughts. So,
That's great. I hope that will happen. Well,
all
thank
right.
you
Well,
everyone
thank
for
you.
yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you.